This is Gene Monterastelli, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 313, originally aired May 2nd, 2018. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending a little time with me today. Today, we're going to talk about when people and situations push our buttons and how we can specifically tap for that. Before we jump into the show, just a quick shout out and thank you to Lorelei. Lorelei is the most recent supporter of the Tapping Q&A podcast. Listeners like Lorelei make sure that we are able to upgrade our equipment and make sure that we are able to continue to provide this podcast absolutely free to people just like you. If you would also like to support the podcast and receive some really cool thank you gifts, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/donate. If you go into the show notes, there's a link for that as well. If you're listening to this in the website, right above the player, there's a link that says support the podcast. We would love it if you supported the show. So in today's episode, what we're going to do is I'm going to run you through a really simple 7-step process that I like to use when getting to the root of and clearing out people and situations that push my buttons. Now, when we're doing this, we're not allowing ourselves simply to become doormats to people who really take advantage of us, but there are certainly times, there are circumstances, there are people, there are moments that because of past that we bring to that moment, we have a larger, stronger, more out of control emotional response than what we would normally like to have. So as we go through the episode today, if you have a chance, I would encourage you to get a pen and a piece of paper to kind of write down all of the steps as we go along. If you are doing something like driving a car right now, please don't be taking notes, because I have for you a way that you can download this process and 13 other processes absolutely free of charge. There's no sign up. You're not getting put in a mailing list, but I will go over that after we go through this 7-step process. So here are the 7 steps that I use when I am tapping to deal with people, places, situations, and moments that push my buttons. So step number 1 is to simply describe the circumstance that is pushing your buttons and the way that that circumstance normally. Step 1 is to describe the circumstance and how you feel when you're experiencing that circumstance. Again, I find this really effective to write out all of my answers to this. So even if you are not taking notes right now, when you do sit down to use this process, I would encourage you to write out all of your answers to these. So in the first step, it's simple things like, this is what normally happens, ... and describe the circumstance, describe what is going on, who is involved, what they are saying, what they are doing, what the environment is like. The second thing you do describe is, this is how it makes me feel. So it makes me feel helpless, overwhelmed, whatever those emotions are. And then the third piece of this first step is to then describe how you normally respond. So it's, this is what is happening, this is how I feel, and this is how I normally respond. Now, sometimes our response isn't necessarily something that we do. I might just sit here and seethe under my breath. Now, I'm not taking an action, but that's a particular response. So write out in as much detail what has happened, how it makes you feel, and how you respond. Now, the second step of this process is to describe the reason why things are the way that they are. So, for example, one of the places that really kind of gets me agitated is anytime I have to deal with a process that's done in a really efficient way. So going to the DMV to get my driver's license renewed is a perfect example of that. Because I have a process brain and I'm used to do that sort of consulting where I organize people and things, I walk into a circumstance like that and it drives me crazy because there's an easier way for them to be doing it. Now, the reason why it is the way that it is it's a big state bureaucracy and there's lots of people involved and they need to not just accommodate someone like me who's doing a simple renewal, but dealing with people from all over the world, an international driver's license, and people who've had their license suspended, and people who are testing for the first time, and all of those things. And so they have to create a system to manage all of that. And so it's difficult to make that in a way that is easy and to be efficient. So in the second part, all I'm doing is I'm describing why the thing is that it happens that way. In the case of the DMV, it is a large system that is managed by lots of people with lots of input, and they're trying to do more things than just deal with my problem. In other cases, it might actually be people making choices because they're being really selfish. Sometimes the people in our lives we love push our buttons because they're being inconsiderate. And so in that case, the description could be, I get really agitated because this member of my family always puts themselves first because they're afraid they're not going to get their way. Now, it's important to recognize in this step, we are not trying to talk ourselves out of having an emotional response, and we're not trying to talk ourselves into being a doormat in this process, but instead, we're just trying to give detail to what is going on, because when we're tapping for something like that, having that detail becomes really useful and efficient. The third step is to describe the way that you would like this to happen differently. Now, sometimes in this description, we're talking about things that we can control, or we're talking about different choices that other people are making, or we might just be fantasizing because we're talking about things that might not actually change, but by describing them, it makes it easier. So you might be using phrases like, instead of how it has happened in the past, I would like this situation to play out like ... Instead of how others have acted in the past, I would like them to act as ... In the future, I would like to respond with this particular emotion. When this happens, I would like to react by. So those 4 phrases, you don't have to use all 4 of them, but those 4 phrases are just ways to start describing what you would like to see different. Either the outcome being different, or the action someone else is being different, or our emotional or practical response being different. In the 4th step, what you're doing is you are describing the practical ways that you would like to change the situation. The phrase that I like to use for this is, I know that I don't control everything, and there are things that won't change. But the way I would like this to work out is... So in the previous step, we're talking about the small responses, the small steps, the small changes. In this 4th step, what we're doing is we're describing the grand outcome and how we would like that outcome to be different. The 5th step is to describe how you might act differently to make this situation or to make this relationship better. And again, this isn't about us completely acquiescing and making someone else's choices and ideas the primary thing that is directing what is going on, but instead, we might be able to recognize some of the places where, because of the baggage we have coming into this, we're immediately going in with our dukes up, or we're on guard for something going wrong, which makes it more likely for us to find those things to go wrong. So the phrase that I like to use for this is, I know that I can't do everything differently, but the things that I can do differently to make this easier are, and again, I just complete that sentence. So now that we've gone through this, we've described the circumstance, we've described how other people are acting, we're describing how it makes us feel, we're describing what outcome we would like to see differently, we're describing the choices that we can make differently. Now that you've answered these 5 parts, in the 6th part, all you're going to do is you're going to read all of this out loud, and you're going to tap as you read it out loud. And as you go from phrase to phrase, just move from tapping point to tapping point to tapping point. And that's one of the reasons why I find it so effective to write something like this out before I tap, is because it's going to help me to have a lot of clarity for these 5 different areas. And oftentimes while I'm tapping, I might find other aspects that I want to add, and I'll just jot them down while I'm tapping. So what I'm doing is I'm creating this really great comprehensive tapping script that I can use again and again. So if I decide to tap on this again in the future, I don't have to spend the time answering these questions. I already have the script there. So go through the entire script, reading it out loud, tapping, and you might do this 2 or 3 times. The 7th step, and this is something that I'm doing more and more with my tapping, is after I do tapping like this, I take a moment to reflect on the new things that I understand about the circumstance and the new things that I understand about myself. And so on the same sheet of paper, again, as I'm collecting this data so I can come back and tap to it again, I simply write, now that I have tapped on this, I understand this about the situation, and I complete that sentence. Now that I have tapped on this, I understand this about myself, and I write that down as well. Because these insights become really useful because doing the tapping is going to help reduce the emotional charge. It's going to help undermine the subconscious beliefs that are there. But by clearly naming the new lessons that we have learned, when we step into those circumstances, we're more likely to remember those lessons, which is going to help us to not be as emotionally charged in the moment. Now, not every time is there going to be a giant lesson to be learned. Sometimes it's just, this stinks and I'm just having too big of an emotional charge. Going to the DMV is never going to be my favorite thing in the world, no matter how much tapping I do. But what I can do is I can understand that it's going to be something that is going to take time in an inefficient process, and ultimately I'm going to get out the door and it's going to take the amount of time it takes. And by having that expectation when I go in, I'm less likely to be overwhelmed by the bad process and how long that it takes, so that even though it still takes just as much time, I come out of it in a more emotionally healthy place. So the process itself is pretty straightforward. Like I said, you can go back and re-listen to this and write it down. If you'd like to have an opportunity to get this entire process written out for you so that you can just follow it along by reading along, this process is included in the book that I wrote, Comprehensive Anger Management, which you can get for free. So 2 things before we talk about how you can get that. Number 1, just because the book is called Comprehensive Anger Management doesn't mean the book is actually about anger. The book was titled that way because I used it when I was teaching in the county jails, and I provide it to inmates now because they are looking for a solution to their anger problems. But the reality is all of the tools in the book can be used for any emotion. Anger is just what they're looking for, so it's an opportunity to get an incarcerated population interested in the book and interested in tapping. The second thing is you can get the book absolutely free by going to tappingqa.com/anger. You can download the PDF on that site. Just go in, work through the shopping cart, put in $0. You get it absolutely free. You're not getting signed up on a mailing list. It's not one of those things. But if you do choose to decide the paperback version or the Kindle version, all of the money that is raised from the purchase of those books goes to providing more books to inmates that are incarcerated. So you can have it absolutely free of charge. You don't feel bad if that's what you want to do. Just know if you purchase it, I'm not taking any of the money. It's being passed along. Again, tappingqa.com/anger. If you know someone who could use this little tool set that I taught you today, please be our ambassador, pass it along. Don't spam your inbox and send it to everybody in the world. But if you pass this along to 1 or 2 people, it will make a difference in their life, which will make a difference for all of us. If you have a question or a comment or a topic that you'd like us to cover in the future, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/contact, or you can email me directly, Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com. I love your suggestions. I love hearing your ideas. Some of the best shows that have happened in the last 6 months have come from listeners just like you. Check out the entire podcast archive at tappingqapodcast.com. We're closing in on 170 hours of free content between tap-along audios, interviews, instruction, just like this. All of it is there, absolutely free of charge. On that site, you can also find out how you can subscribe to the podcast in Apple Podcasts, in iTunes, in Stitcher, in TuneIn, in Google Music Play. There's even a way now on an Android phone that's really easy for you to subscribe, tappingqapodcast.com. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Monterastelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Monterastelli, Tapping Q&A 2016. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Monterastelli or Tapping Q&A.